Welcome back, everyone. It's been a while since I did a little sit down video. I mean, I've done some intros, obviously, but yeah, it's time to start recording in earnest. I'm going to get a new phone very soon, hopefully. Just got to get some stuff with the plan worked out, and then I'll have GoPro footage up. The goal is the D Day, kind of, if you will, for GoPro footage, as well as the resuming, fingers crossed, of tournaments again is June 6th. So that is the next scheduled tournament. I have 3 tournaments in a week in June, and then because of all the reordering that had to happen, so that's why there hasn't been any updates on the tournaments. But again, that's starting to sneak up on me a little bit. So in the next week or couple weeks, I'll do a preview of that event and hopefully have the GoPro up and running by then, so that way I can get some footage of that. And it'll all be really cool, and you won't just have to take my word for it. You'll actually be able to see what happens on the water, or at least some of it. Better than nothing anyway. But today, I want to walk you through jigs, bass fishing jigs. They are, in my mind, probably one of the most important baits you can fish as a bass fisherman. If you're not fishing them, it's a mistake. They are they're for a couple of reasons, and I'll get into the why here in a second. But for right now, I didn't even used to fish jigs myself. I think it was even 2017. I don't think I really fished jigs much at all. But I'd always heard they were good. I had some in my box, and I'm one of those people who I can't stand having baits in my box that I'm not even using. So of course I wanted to learn how to fish it. So I started fishing it some. Started getting pretty good with it. I mean, the average size I was catching was really solid. It was effective, in fairly heavy cover. It was good around rock, even open water. Just kind of nothing on the bottom. It was a good bait, and then also, like I say, average size was really good. Hook up to land ratio, where I set the hook versus how many fish I get in versus how many fish I lose, was really good. Then I went and finished 4th at a tournament last year, and I caught 2 of the big fish in my 3 fish that I weighed in. I caught 2 of them on the jig, and one of them was a really solid fish. So that was a really good way to get that started off. And I caught the clinching fish in a later tournament that year on a win that I had on a jig. So again, the jig is, I want to say it's my go-to. It's a great bait. It's very versatile. It will get bites when almost nothing else will. And it's a good big fish bait. I mean, again, if you're looking for a complete package, there's not much in terms of what you can throw that is better than a bass jig. So I'm going to get into this to start with. So first, you have the different styles of jigs. So let me get into that. So basically, I fish a couple different kinds of jigs predominantly, with some other ones being kind of more specialized stuff. But predominantly I fish, let's see here. You can fish a ball head finesse jig. This is I want to say it's a 1/4 ounce or a 3/16 ounce ball head jig. It's got a light wire hook. You can see it's not the heavy jungle style flipping hook that you see on some of those big jigs. It's got a little, I think it's a 3-inch or 4-inch Rage Menace trailer. That's in like a grass candy color. Color's not all that important. It's just the style is what I'm trying to emphasize. But this is a round head jig. It's very versatile. It's good around rock, especially because that head really catches on rocks and it'll tip it up and cause it to scootle on the bottom, which looks like a crawdad. So a very good cold water bait. Again, you don't want to get a real heavy one of these. These are nice and light, designed for lighter line, colder conditions, more difficult fishing. Then you have hybrid jigs. I fish a lot of these because, again, they're very versatile. This, I believe, is a 1/2 ounce 6 cents hybrid jig. You can see it's got a much thicker wire hook on there. A little bit bigger weed guard. You can see the head it's rounded, but it's not round by any means. It's not circular. It's got the little veins in it. And when they say it's a hybrid jig, that means you can swim it like a swim jig. And I'm not doing a swim jig video right now. I'll do that later. But you can swim it like a swim jig, or you can use it around structure like a regular jig. So again, if you have to kind of change with the conditions, because you can fish those baits on very similar tackle, you can do it. This isn't just a great all-around like bluegill kind of grass candy green pumpkin color. And then you have flipping jigs, which are basically like hybrid jigs. And the whole point of a flipping jig is, I don't know if you can see, but it's like this tight bullet style head. It's heavier. This is not even that heavy of one. I think this is a 1/2 ounce, but a lot of them you can get in 3/4 or even a whole ounce. They're just designed you can sling it into really heavy cover. They have a very heavy duty hook. thicker brush guard, very stiff brush guard. And you can sling it into cover, and you can pull it through that cover without getting hung on stuff. And it's designed to cover heavy structure, weeds, docks, laydowns, anything you can imagine in terms of habitat that you're trying to fish quickly. And you're doing it with those short range, heavy line, heavy rod. You can just flip it in there. That is what the flipping jig is for. You don't have to use a flipping jig for that, but this is a really good jig around woody cover, especially because, again, it doesn't get hung on those little, the little crevices and limbs. The jig doesn't get hung up so easily in that. It comes through that a little bit better. So it's good for that. Then you have the football head jig, which, as you can see, is a reference to the type of head, how it's an oval. It's designed to really works best around like deep structure, brush piles, rock piles, ledges, stuff like that. And a lot of deep offshore fishermen use them, which is primarily why I haven't used them as much, because I just haven't had to. I can use my, my lighter, more structure, bank structure style of jigs, and I can do just as well. So I don't use as much of these jigs, but they are very effective bass catchers. You can see it's got that oval head, and again, what it does is as you're pulling them along the bottom, it hits a shell, it'll tip up, and then whenever you continue to increase tension, it'll pop off of there, and that's what will trigger that reaction bite for whatever fish are kind of holding around that structure. So that's what a football jig does. Now I'm going to get into trailers, and so basically when you're styling your trailers and your colors and what you put on your bait versus what your bait's color is, I think the best thing to tell you is fiddle around, figure out what you're comfortable with, figure out what you like the best. Everyone's going to have their own little unique touches that's going to make their jig special. And that's the thing. I have my own jig, preferences that I use for tournaments. I use for just fun fishing. Just they catch me more fish, and I believe in them. Like, I know what I'm putting on is going to work for the conditions I'm using it for. So, but with that in mind, there are some basic rules you can follow. Dark green pumpkin is a great jig color. I mean, it just is. It doesn't matter if it's a huge jig or if it's a little bitty, 3/8 ounce weight jig, it will work. Green pumpkin will work. If you don't have anything else in your box, green pumpkin will work. It is good in clear water. It is good in muddy water. It is good for fish that are feeding on bluegill. It's good for feeding on crawfish. It's good for fish that are feeding on freaking shad. They don't even care. Green pumpkin is an amazing, amazing color for a jig. And it's really because if fish are biting a jig, there's a certain set of colors they like. Fish that are feeding on shad, it's not really going to be about the jig bite. It just isn't. They're going to be out and, they're going to be out roaming around looking up, and they're not going to be looking down. So if a fish is looking down, odds are very good you have some kind of a jig bite. And if that is the case, green pumpkin is going to be a standby. You're going to want green pumpkin tied on. But again, the other color I would say is just black and blue. It's good especially for muddy water. I think the only exception to green pumpkin is if it's very muddy water. Putting on a black and blue jig, this one's got a rattle. That can be a really good move. Again, once the water's that color, it's essentially green pumpkin for really muddy water. So it's doing the same job. It's just that darker color. And I don't know why blue makes it so effective, but straight black is not nearly as effective as black and blue. Don't ask me why, but black and blue is the way to go for muddy water for sure. As for trailers, what you want to do is you want to find something that complements the color of your jig, and also I would say isn't too long. And so what I mean by that is you got to kind of modify a beaver bait such as, like this Missile Baits D-Bomb. You can see I've got it rigged up on this jig here. Now, this is actually a good example. This is really too long. You can see it sticks out like 2 inches beneath the trailer, the skirt, and it's really too long because a fish can easily just come up and grab this and run off with it. And so whenever you set the hook, not only are you missing the fish, you're going to rip these legs right off, and you're going to be out your bait as well. So what you should do in that case is thread your bait off. Is this a screw on? I bet this is a screw on. Hold on. Yeah, it's definitely a screw on. That would be my luck. All right, here's another one. I'll just do this one. You just unthread it, pull it off the bait. Or, in my case, if you haven't already put it on, then you just take your bait here and you bite off the end. Just a couple inches. So now you've got a much shorter piece. And then you can just take it and thread it back onto your jig, and now your bait is a much more It's a much more compact profile. So when that fish does pick up your bait, he's going to have the whole thing. He's going to have the hook as well as the trailer whenever he grabs it. So that is probably the two biggest things to me. And again, fiddle around with color combinations. I think green pumpkin is, again, just, it doesn't really matter what trailer you use. That's a good trailer option. And again, you can try creature baits. Again, you can try a lot of different stuff. I guess the way I kind of view it is make it compact, try to make it either look like a crawdad or a brim on the bottom, like a bluegill. Just kind of do what you can to imitate the forge and also keep it natural. Again, something with just a little bit of wiggle with really good texture to it. Those are all things fish really like in a jig trailer, and they give you more time once the fish hits the jig, believe me. One of the reasons I love using this D-bomb on these jigs is it's got these nice little ribs on there, and I mean, the fish love that. That texture. It helps them. It feels lifelike. So when they grab it and they start swimming off with it, the amount of time you have to react to the bite to set the hook is greatly increased by the fact that the fish is holding onto it, because it feels like, I don't know, a crawdad or a bluegill. It feels like something that is, going to be good to eat instead of just, lead head jig and a hook. So again, really important stuff when you're trying to think about that. But again, there's a lot of different stuff on the market in terms of soft plastics, in terms of jigs, and you have all this at your disposal, and you can bring them together and create your own kind of perfect jig setup. And that's a lot of fun. I think it's fun when you get to trying to kind of figure out what works for you and what catches fish for you, and you have your own secret little stuff, because trust me, there is a jig you will find that will work really well for whatever you do that I will not be able to use as well. Just like I have stuff that you will not be able to use nearly as well as I do. So that is probably the coolest part about jig fishing, is there's always something you can find that's just it's like your own secret sauce, and you've got it, and no one else can kind of can really do what you do with that bait. That is probably the coolest part about jig fishing. But like I say, just kind of keep it subtle. One thing I will say is a lot of times in the spring, green pumpkin and black and blue, like take a green pumpkin jig, put a black and blue trailer on, and the mix is very attractive. Fish really like that. But again, colors are very simple. Really, fishing style is very simple. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to find structure. Jigs always work best around structure, especially once it starts getting hot. Because what those fish do is they hold up tight to structure, and they often sit down in the water column a little bit, especially once the sun gets up. Because in the summertime, you've got boats, you've got heat, you've got increased fishing pressure. The weather's nice. Everyone's at the lake. So these fish immediately start moving down in the water column toward the base of whatever structure they're on. And that's when the jig becomes handy, because you get that jig in there and you start popping it along the bottom. That's the first thing the fish is going to see. And you pop that thing right. And if you've got a good presentation where it's lifelike, where it's, an attractive presentation, and it's not too big or, I don't know, too loud, maybe it's got rattles. If you put the right presentation in front of the fish, he'll bite that. And oftentimes some of your best bites in the summer come on a jig. So that is probably my advice. As for what I fish a jig on, that's also not too complicated. I fish a jig on, this is my ultra heavy setup. It's a 7'6" heavy rod with 20-pound fluorocarbon and an 8-to-1 gear ratio Abu Garcia reel. Obviously, reel brand doesn't matter. I think high-speed reels are very helpful, especially when you're fishing heavy jigs with short casts and stuff. The other setup I use is this 15-pound Coplamer on a little bit slower setup. I think it's a 6-6-1 ratio reel. Don't use anything slower than that, because a lot of times fish, when they inhale the bait, they put slack in their line with a jig. Very important to have a reel that can catch up to the fish so you have time to set the hook, because again, that's a jig. No matter how lifelike you make it feel, it's still, at the end of the day, it's just that jig with, just the lead head jig with the hook. The fish is going to feel that eventually, and he's going to spit it out. So it's very important that you have the reel to be able to reel down quickly enough to set the hook into the fish's mouth. But again, this is a 7-foot medium heavy, just a Berkeley Lightning. It's a $40 rod. It's a great all-purpose rod, and it works really good for fishing semi-heavy, semi-heavy like Texas rigs, worm fishing, jig fishing, a little bit of chatterbaits sometimes. But again, this is probably my go-to jig setup. This is my go-to jig. I caught my personal best fish on it. I caught the tournament winning fish on this jig. I've made more money on this jig specifically, than any other jig or any other bait for that matter in my life. So again, I hope that was helpful. If you have any other questions, just kind of, I guess, hit me up and maybe I can do a repeat video. Jigs, there's a lot to get into, but that being said, those are the basics. That is all you need to go and kind of get your own jig fishing setup put together and go catch some bass. Again, you can catch the biggest bass of your life on a jig, and it's a lot of fun because what will end up happening is you'll be fishing that jig along, and again, if it's a jig bite, you know how you know it's a jig bite is when you feel thunk, like not like a tick, like a thunk, because that's the fish flaring his gills and sucking that jig right in, because that means you did everything right, and all that fish wants is that jig right then. So that's how you know. And then you set the hook and you land the fish, and then you do it again, because usually if you can catch one on the jig, you can do that all over the lake. So